Hi, this is Shauna. Before we get to today's guest, I want to take a minute to learn more about you, the listener. We've put together a short survey at fueltalent.com/podcast to gather information on who's listening and to give you a chance to make suggestions and comments about the show. I want What Fuels You to be a great resource for you and your interests, and I hope these interviews give you practical advice along with inspiration for your career and life. Help us continue to serve you better by going to fueltalent.com/podcast. Thank you so much. Now let's start today's show. Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Dave Cole. Dave is the CEO and co-founder of OpenRaven, a Kleiner Perkins-backed post-Series B company focused on reimagining data security for the modern era. He also started the Security Voices podcast as a sponsorless show focused on highlighting the diverse people and perspectives in cybersecurity. Dave's fingerprints are visible across the cybersecurity industry from his 26 years of working as a leader in consulting at Deloitte and ISS, enterprise products at Foundstone, CrowdStrike, and Tenable, and consumer products at Norton. Dave is a frequent spokesperson making appearances on NBC, CNN, and elsewhere while speaking at industry events such as RSA, Black Hat, and B-Sides Las Vegas. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and is a member of the board of UM School of Information and Inspective. Dave is an investor focused on helping to grow businesses in his hometown of Los Angeles, where he lives with his wife and son. Welcome, Dave. So good to see you. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire. You ready?
Let's go.
I'm going to give you an easy one to start. I know you're really obsessed with LA, but I'm going to hit you with beach or mountains.
Beach.
Of course, yes, because you chose your beautiful spot there. If there was a book written about your life, what would it be called?
I'll tell you what it would be like. It would be an adventure. It would be in some form of epic adventure where the character follows an equal combination of their heart and their whims, their serendipity, and ends up in all sorts of places they never intended to be, meeting all sorts of people they never expected to be with. And at the end of it, they figure out that they're just about as happy and as accomplished as they decide that they are.
Oh, I like that. That's like wisdom, right? That's reflection and wisdom. I love that. Okay, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
I think, and this is something that I actually work on, but I had a friend once when I was in college. She was a senior, I was a freshman. And I watched this person. His name is Mark Stoll. He's no longer with us. But he had this ability when he spoke to people to make you feel like you were the only one in the room that mattered to him. And the impact he had on people was profound. It was just this deep listening and focus. And it impacted me deeply. And I just watched him with other people, like the charisma and the connection that he had. And I've always tried to become that type of listener and build that type of connection with people, because it was amazing to see. And I think it's all the more appealing because it's real.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I'd love to fly. Yes, I'm a diver. I'd love to hold my breath underwater for like hours and go down into the depths. But at the end of the day, like that's something that actually like I can work on, and I've seen the impact of it, and it's magical.
Well, that's amazing. I think I've asked this question a lot. I don't ask it every time because obviously rapid fire, otherwise people would know what I'm asking. But I do ask it frequently, and I love the answers people give. You're the only person who's ever given something that's like super attainable. And I actually, having met you, I think you're good at that. I don't think it's like such a stretch. I think you actually are, you're close. If you're not there, I can tell you that, you know, I would imagine that Mark would be proud. I don't know how he passed away, but
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
yeah,
20 years of work and more to
yeah,
go. So,
yeah, no, it's great. What are the 3 attributes that you feel are the most important attributes that make someone successful as an entrepreneur?
ooh, um, first off, you know, you have to be 100% committed. Most people give up before they're done and just don't persevere. And there's this mythology that you have to have the best idea. You know, you have to like, oh, well, it's just, you know, the crowning achievement was coming up with some great idea. The idea is honestly like such a small percentage of it. A lot of it is just continuing to do it when you don't feel like doing it anymore. Yeah, and pushing through the spots where it sucks and iterating and not being satisfied when you've hit a wall or hit a lull and saying, you know what, not asking, not feeling like, oh well, God, I guess we failed. It's like, no, 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 no. What's the adjustment? What's the change that needs to be made here? Do I need to be a little more patient? Do I need to think about it differently? So I'd say like perseverance is just dramatically, I think, the most important thing. Um, Secondly, I think it's having an incredibly open mind. Your things are going to change. I mean, we started the company right before a pandemic, and the situation changed. The fundraising environment changed dramatically in the past year and a half, from where it was before. How do you adapt to that? We have employees in the Ukraine who are dear to us. How do you deal with employees who are in a war-torn country? Um, you know, there's just all these situations where you look at it and it's like, okay, what does the situation demand from me? So it's this open mind, and it's this willing to rethink your, you know, your precepts and what leadership is and so on. After that, I think it's just honestly, it's energy. It's like you've just got to bust your tail. Like you'd like to say it differently, but if you don't persevere, if you're not adaptable, you know, you're not going to get there. But at the end of the day, you got to have a motor. You better have a V8 engine up in there in order to drive through. Because even if you're adaptable, even if you persevere, if you're slow, you'll get run over.
Yeah, I love those. Love, love, love. If you could be famous for something, like anything, athlete, actor, writer, entrepreneur, uh, what would you choose?
Ooh, it's a toss up. It's a toss up. And there are two things that I want to do in the future. So one would be I'd love to be a pianist of all
Oh,
things. I love music. I absolutely have no talent whatsoever, but I used to be like Harry Connick Jr. and you know, loved him, you know, singing at the piano and all of that. And recently, like my tastes have gone more classical, Claude Debussy and so on. So I want to learn how to play Clair de Lune and maybe play in an audience. And then my son playing tennis has awoken me to how amazing tennis is as a sport. It'd be super fun to play tennis at a high level too. So
yeah.
we'll see.
I've asked this question also, and a few people have said famous tennis player because they feel that that's one that you can be like famous enough that you can still go in public and also have the feeling of like conquering something, but also have the international exposure and travel. Yeah, tennis would be a good one. Okay. Did you have any childhood nicknames? Or do you have any nicknames right now?
um, no good ones.
None that
No
you can
good
say, none
ones.
that you can
No,
say on the podcast.
no, not even particularly profane ones. But yeah, there was a guy who used to call me Gravy. It's like, oh, we'll throw Dave in the meeting and it'll make it better, just like Gravy. He
Nice.
was a very sweet, very, very fun sales guy. But most times, I just go by, in a lot of places, there's so many Daves that I just go by DC for Dave
Yeah, well,
Cole. So
that's why I was asking
yeah.
because like my husband's David and Sometimes people call him Dave, mostly David. And I feel like we're always in a room of lots of Davids. So
Always.
figured that there might be some nicknames. So tell me, I mean, you're from Michigan, right? You grew up
That's
there?
right. Yeah.
And tell me about growing up there. I've actually never been there, which is crazy. And I've met so many people from there, and I have yet to meet somebody that is not really super cool and kind from there.
Oh, wow. That's a high bar for a Michigander.
Tell me about your childhood there.
Yeah, so I was born in Toledo, Ohio, and then my father got a job in Battle Creek, Michigan, and we moved to a street called Hogue Road, which was a dead end street in the middle of the sticks. My father was a nurse anesthetist there, and my mother. Both parents come from big families. My dad actually flunked out of college. My mom was told she was not smart enough to go to college, and basically she supported us while my dad, after he flunked out of college, he was drafted, and he was on the GI Bill. So my mother supported us by working at a beauty salon. My dad finally graduated, and we broke out of Ohio with no delay up to Battle Creek, Michigan, which, if it sounds familiar, Battle Creek, Michigan is the home of Kellogg's and Post. So
Ah,
at the time, yeah, you would wake up in the morning and the entire city would smell like cereal. Um, it was it was okay. I mean, you just sort of tune it out, right? After a while. But I actually even went to University of Michigan when I went to school. I had a very small scholarship from Kellogg's that they like throw at you as one of the top students in the community. So it was look, I had a great childhood. I have fond memories. It wasn't perfect, but it was very much a childhood spent like I'm sure so many other people who live in kind of rural areas. Like you get kicked out of the house in the morning and you're told to come back maybe for lunch, but especially for dinner. You
yeah,
know, it was kind of that.
much simpler than the childhood that our kids are having for sure.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think, sometimes I'll contrast for my son who's 11, like how he's growing up versus I did. I mean, he's so much more worldly and informed and smart than I was. But having said that, I had a lot of time to indulge my creativity. It was a much more relaxed lifestyle. We were in front of a forest or a swamp, depending on the time of year. And we had just some amazing adventures, like just going out and playing in the forest or like tooling around the swamp when it turned into one. And
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you say we, who's the we? Siblings?
Oh, yeah. I had an older sister, but generally, like, much like so many kids, I think of that age, it was a dead end street. So we had we had like a posse that was
Yeah.
there.
I had the same thing, and I was like the baby of the posse. There was probably I had a cul-de-sac too. There was like 20 kids, similar type of thing. We would just be out all day riding our bikes around. And it would literally be like, come home for dinner. And it was the best, 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 same thing in the forest, riding through. And you think back and you're like, wait, we didn't have phones. Like, I mean, it was so, I think of it as being pretty idyllic. I really do.
Yeah.
Like, I look really fondly back at that. But you also mentioned, like, so your dad, I think you just said failed or flunked out of college.
Yeah.
And is that the kind of thing where he said, because Michigan's obviously a killer school, like my kids are going to make up for that and go to great schools, or was that all kind of coming from within from you?
From within. Yeah, my sister actually kind of blazed the trail. She was 3 years older than me, and she went to Western Michigan, which was a good school. So at first I was like, I'll go to Western Michigan. I'll get a great scholarship. This will be fine. But I didn't get the scholarship I wanted. And being like a competitive person, I was like, well, screw this. Like, screw Western Michigan. I'm not going to go there. And I kind of decided Michigan late. It was, I was looking at a private school that I would have liked better that was in the area. But it was just expensive. And my parents said, look, here's how much money you have for college. This is what we saved. You can either take this and go to Michigan, or you can go to, said private school. It's called Kalamazoo College, and pay us back. And I looked at it and said, Michigan's great. Why wouldn't I just go there? And they
Yeah.
tried to dissuade me from it. They're like, look, you went to a small school, small town. Like, we're not like, my mom had gone back to school, but at the community college there and became an accountant, which was amazing to see. And, but I mean, honestly, there wasn't any academic tradition in the family whatsoever. And they were worried about me getting lost. I said, no, I got this. And sure enough, I did. Went
Yeah.
off to University of Michigan, and it was amazing. It was one of the best decisions I ever made.
And would you say that was kind of where you, like the beginning of kind of thriving, or was high school like a really successful period for you?
High school was awesome. I mean, I not without its styles and so forth. And look, I played a lot of sports, but I was a super mediocre athlete. So I have athletic skills made for academia. So I was, I played a lot of sports, nothing that I was terribly good at, but I really enjoyed it nonetheless. I had a great time, did well in school. It was,
Yeah.
I honestly, like, I have no complaints. I had a decidedly like middle class upbringing, dead end street in front of a swamp, like for half my childhood. But it was idyllic, like you said, and I
Yeah.
was allowed to follow my muse, and I had enough competitive fire in me, and my sister kind of showed me a little bit of what's possible, and I just kind of kept built upon that and took it to the next level. But I very much had the space that I needed, and a lot of the drive and everything was already inside me. And it's funny, I see it in my own son, and I read a fair bit and listen to things, and it feels like so much of it is just nature, and it's
Yeah.
inside you. And it was there, and I was very fortunate, very blessed to have the space just to let that evolve. And Michigan just gave me more space to kind of build on that. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
Are you in touch with your friends from like fifth grade, middle school, like that period? And if I were to meet them today and say like, hey, David's a tech entrepreneur, would that surprise them? Was that like, oh yeah, we could have said that, like
Yeah.
we could have called that back then?
Yeah, they would have. It would surprise exactly no one. I mean, I've always been roughly this way. So no, they're not surprised. I still have one buddy from junior high up until now that I stay in touch with. And yeah,
Yeah,
he's
that's always
no
been.
one's surprised. I've been very driven even from the beginning, super
Yeah.
competitive, high energy, disciplined, that sort of thing. Like I'd
Yeah.
wake up in the morning and ask my mom, like, what are we doing today? Like, what's the
Yeah.
plan?
What do you remember? And like, I guess, has it changed? Like what are you driven by? I mean, when I hear people are competitive, is it kind of more fear-based or more kind of I guess there are people who say, I was doubted and I want to prove people wrong, or I want to win, or I want to make someone proud, or like what is it about for you when you say you're competitive?
There's always an element of, you want to prove someone wrong, or you want to get to a place that someone said you couldn't get to. So as much as like, yes, I'm driven. I love watching things grow. I love it, whether it's people, whether it's the evolution of a product. I'm a diehard product person. Whether it's a garden, like I love it. I love the little insights. I love like, the green shoots that come up. I got a message 2 weekends ago from a guy who worked at me as a VP of product marketing and said, hey, I learned this from you and it's really helped me. And that like it made my whole weekend. It was amazing. But having said that, like those are all like the positive things. I think anybody who's truly competitive will tell you like there's all of that. And there's also a bit of piss and vinegar, if we're totally honest, where it's like, I'll show you. Like, yeah, thought I couldn't get there. Like, let's go.
Hmm.
Let's go. I'm gonna get up earlier than you. I'm gonna finish stronger. I'm gonna push through. It's yeah. So I'd say like, there's both, it's equal forces. It's absolutely yin and yang. I think it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, a lot of people say that. That's so interesting. And did you remember when you were, I guess when you went to Michigan, did you have a sense of kind of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Were you driving towards something, or was it like, let me go study business? What did you major in?
Yeah. So my first year, I was really good at foreign language. I loved it. And my first year, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I just took a bunch of language courses. And of course, like, I took Spanish and Japanese, Spanish because I loved it, Japanese because I thought it would be really, really hard. And I wanted to be the best Japanese student at University of Michigan. And I came super close. There was a Korean guy, Choi-san, wherever you are. I could never beat him. I came super close, and they gave out ratings, every week. But after that, I realized, oh God, I'm not going to be an interpreter. I'm not going to be a diplomat. I need to like figure something else out. And I figured, you know what? I'll just go into this business school so I can get a job so I could sustain myself. I mean, I very much look, I mean, when we were young, my mom didn't make much money. My grandparents, watched over us. My grandmothers watched over us for the first 5-6 years. We lived off food stamps, and whatever we could scrape together. It wasn't, I knew deep inside, I knew what it was to kind of scrape by. I didn't want to scrape by. I knew I had to do something that made money. So I looked at it and said, smart enough to get into B school, I'll apply to business school, undergrad business school. And I don't know what I'll do there, but I'll do something, and my language skills won't hurt. So I kind of balanced my language lessons alongside all the prereqs for business, got into B school, and then really fell in love with technology. It was around the time that the internet, it was becoming obvious what it was to become. And I fell in love with it. And I couldn't get an internship anywhere. I failed out of like 8 interviews my junior year. Like I lived in a house with like 10 other guys, and we all posted up all our rejection messages on the wall. We had the wall of shame, and a good like half of those were mine. And so I got stuck in Ann Arbor for the summer. I said, well, what am I going to do? Like, well, I'm going to code. And I took on like 3-4 jobs, took coding classes, and refactored myself as, a person in technology, and, graduated and went right into tech. So yeah,
that's brilliant. Like best move ever. So what was your first job right out of school?
It was great. It was Deloitte and Touche at the time. I think it's just Deloitte now, but they had started their consulting practice. And the only job I could get was in computer security. And they said, well, come out here and do this. I said, oh my God, that sounds so boring. Like, and I'm not a terribly risk averse person. So me working in security was kind of comical, but I'd fallen in love with Los Angeles. I came out on a spring break with a friend who had a brother in Cerritos, which is only notable for its auto mall. And basically I looked at it and said, my God, these people are happy. These people are beautiful. The weather's beautiful. It's like, would I like to be happy in a beautiful place full of beautiful people who are enjoying themselves? Yes. Yes, I would. And while I made some not so amazing decisions in my 20s, that one has held true up until now. So yeah, I passed a point recently where I realized I lived longer in LA than I had in Michigan. And I kind of, set down my Michigander status, and I'm a semi-native Los Angelino now, I suppose.
Yes, you are. So Deloitte, you were there for a while. So consulting, and then ISS.
Yeah. Well, what happened is I looked at this, and it was fine. Like it was fun, but I had a friend who said, you need to join this high flying startup here who's making some really amazing stuff in tech land. I said, yeah, I'd like to get more technical again. Like I was starting to get pretty technical, and now I've gotten a little fluffy over here at Deloitte. Let me dig in. So I went over to ISS, which was an amazing company at the time. And I was a consultant. I was doing incident response, basically some of the early Chinese hacks. I was called in to help drive the response. We did things, security assessments, like, can you break into OpenTable? I was one of my customers at the time, and a bunch of others. So it was super fun. But I was working with the products the company had, and I was dealing with the product people, and I felt like they weren't really listening to me. And I felt like there was a place where they could take one particular line of products that they had that they weren't interested in going. And I ran into some folks who were one of my former consultants who said, hey, you should talk to these guys. They've got similar ideas to you. And sure enough, I did. I'm like, yeah, I got to do this. Like, I'm going to go build this product. Like, we've got this idea. Like, these guys are already onto it. Like, let's go. So I jumped in order to go build a product for the first time in like right around the year 2000. So, and this marks my 23rd year building cybersecurity products.
What was that company and what was that like business model? And how did you even know what you were doing as far as like, um, how do you start it? How do you raise money? The whole
Yeah.
thing. Like that's something that there's no playbook necessarily unless you had a mentor.
Well, they'd already started the company. So I was along for the ride. They brought me in as
Yeah.
the product person, but they didn't know what they were doing. It was their first time building a company. It was my first time building a product. So the level of cluelessness was through the roof. But having said that, we proceeded undaunted because we had a whole bunch of technical knowledge and domain knowledge, and we parlayed that into, I'd say, like a semi-successful business. The company was called Foundstone, and the alumni from that company are amazing. I mean, it's literally some of the most impressive people to ever work in cybersecurity. And there's a few groups like that, but Foundstone's one of the most special. It wasn't a super successful business. We were a little early. We were building what's now called the vulnerability management category, and we just didn't know how to lay down the right foundation. And we didn't know how to play the long game. We weren't patient enough. We were a little too early from the market, and we ended up selling about 4.5 years into it, maybe 5, since they'd started a little earlier than me. And we sold to McAfee, which was a decent sale at the time. But I wasn't very interested in it. I'd worked with the product and been through some really hard yards. So I basically, when they made the transition, I quit straight away and went to Australia, and just went to Australia for a month and went scuba diving and rented like a van and drove up to Cape Tribulation, from Cairns, and, spent time just like underwater mostly, but also in the jungles, and just kind of cleansing my palate before I took another job.
Was your plan to kind of really decompress for a while and then you got a bug? Was it like I can't do this for very long and then um what happens next? Because sometimes, I talk to people all the time who are like, don't call me about any jobs, or, I'm really trying to decompress and take a break and regroup. And then they're like, I can't stop. I have an idea, or someone calls them, or they run into somebody they used to work with. Like, what kind of brought you back in?
Need. If I could have, I would have stayed in Australia for a long, long time. But need and a girlfriend who was to become my wife, kind of pulled me back. And yeah, I had a condo to pay for and didn't have that much in savings. And, but I realized like I wanted to build products at scale and learn from people who knew what they were doing. I learned a lot. I learned more than I knew at the time. But I had that thing of like, wow, there's all this stuff out there that I don't know. It would be awesome to work in an organization who has it all figured out. You know, Fast forward to the answer, nobody has it all figured out. And once you do, it changes. But having said that, the desire to work inside an organization that was building products at tremendous scale was what I wanted. And I found that at Symantec. So, and Symantec at the time was amazing. I mean, it just kind of fell apart, largely kind of over my tenure there, but I got exactly what I wanted out of it.
Yeah.
It was a tremendous learning experience. And I got a whole bunch of opportunities to do cool stuff. Like I did broadcast media. I got to talk on CNN and NBC, and I got to do all sorts of cool research opportunities and work with the Federal Trade Commission and all sorts of things, brush up against congressional testimony. And it was amazing. And I ran Norton. I ran the Norton product line for half a decade and pulled it out of being fast and slow to being super duper fast and good again. And then tried to bring the product line into the future. So
Yeah.
it was an amazing experience. And it was nice to be in a big company after being in a small one. I mean, I don't believe that there's startup people or big company people. I enjoy them both. Like I've got no problem. I'll probably work in a large organization again at some point, and I'll enjoy it. I mean, there's absolute advantages to both.
There are definitely advantages to both. I don't know if I necessarily agree that there's not necessarily big company and small company people, because there are definitely people who do not do well in startups. They just can't deal with the ambiguity. They can't, all those things that you were talking about, the grit, the perseverance, the energy. Um, you know, a lot of startups that I work with when they're recruiting don't even want to see people out of certain large companies who outsource everything, or who, you know, they've got layers and meetings about meetings. Startups, you just have to be so, like you were saying, so much energy, so quick, less bureaucracy. But I understand.
Yeah.
But you're like more of a unicorn, though. There's not that many people who are super strong at both. And some people who are entrepreneurs who could never work in a large company.
Yeah.
But you are like, yeah, you're unique. I don't know that it's everybody. So of the different companies that you've worked for, like which ones have been kind of your favorites, or that have been most influential as far as informing, I guess, the type of company that you wanted to start, as far as culture and just intention and values and all of that, when you started OpenRaven?
Yeah. I mean, I took something from each one of them. I really did. And from leaders at each place, I'd say CrowdStrike. I came in pretty early in CrowdStrike. I'd known George from Foundstone, who's the CEO there, and the product excellence that George drove, he did a great job, and just creating space for me to get the product out in the right way, and just the speed and the competitiveness. Those were all things that I wanted to pull from George. I had an amazing boss at Symantec for a period of time. I had a couple of them. One of them was Janice Chafin, and Janice was just fundamentally sound and knew how to like guide people's careers and make decisions that balance head and heart. I was fortunate to work with a visionary, a guy by the name of Roland Trollope, who is an amazing storyteller. From Tenable, I went in there and it was a mom and pop that was trying to grow up and get through a growth phase. I don't think I realized it at the time, but some of the things that I took away from that is just how you can bootstrap something and how you can do something lean and just really focus on, keeping something growing at a natural pace and not have to have all the niceties and amenities, and things don't have to be perfect and they don't have to be, first class and so forth. Sometimes it's just about getting through. And
like the scrappiness.
Yeah, just that scrappiness was there, and they grew that into a company that IPO'd and has done quite well. So yeah, there's just instrumental lessons from all these places. If you keep your eyes open, and you keep your mind equally open, there was something to be learned from every one of these experiences.
Yeah. And tell me about OpenRaven. So how'd you come up with the name, and what was the original business idea and model, and how has that changed or stayed the same?
It's funny. It stayed largely the same. I mean, we had an insight. It took like 3 to 4 months to really center on the right idea. And I've got this 40, 50 page like diary of a madman, where I was out interviewing people, friends, security leaders. I was listening to webinars. I was reading research and asking questions of investors. And some of this I did out in the open. I was running Security Voices, the podcast. So literally the investors I'd be talking to, I'd have them on the podcast. So if you want to like hear some of the early days of OpenRaven, you can do it on Security Voices, and you can actually see the investors that I was talking to because they were on the podcast. So it was fun. It was fairly public, but I would take all these notes, and we had the idea wrong in the first like 3 to 4 months. We were kind of marching down a more mundane space where there was already a leader, and people kept directing us back to the data security space. And the insight that we had was that there was a huge need for a data security company that had modern kind of cloud sensibilities, that wasn't trying to sell to privacy and trying to like check the regulatory box for people, and also wasn't trying to sell to data teams, but was trying to catch up the security teams and the cloud engineering teams to the data economy. The data people had just sort of run ahead. These data science teams had grown dramatically. The intelligence, the analytics, the tooling that they had, tons of open source, lots of commercial products that keep getting better and better. Look at Databricks, look at Snowflake, look at DBT, look at all these amazing companies. What did the security teams and the cloud teams have to keep up with them? And the answer was not a hell of a lot. So the concept was bring them the tooling, the platform that would allow them to catch up and know where all the data is, know what type of data they have, and make sure that it was protected in the right way, make painful things like compliance super easy and so on. And that was the insight. And we were in a market with really only us and like a couple companies. And then all of a sudden, like the gates broke through in late 2021. We started in 2019. In late 2021, early 2022, I mean, they just came out of the woodworks, and it was, it was incredible validation of our concept and what we were doing. A little bit scary too. We're like, oh my God, like, we went from went for a jog in the wilderness, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in like the New York Marathon. Like, wow, this is different.
Yeah.
But it's also incredible validation that we were onto something at that time. So, the name comes from a few things. So one, we have an open source core, and we felt like we were further along, in our careers. I've been at this since 96. We said the companies that we respect and that we, feel a connection to all have an open source core. And that level of transparency is really important, especially for cloud engineers and security engineers. The platform needs to be accessible. They need to be able to look at it and understand and see the code in certain areas to attest to the quality and even extend it. But it also is a spirit of transparency and candor that we try and foster inside the company. On the Raven side, what we were trying to do there is when we were talking to people about the problem, they had this inability to see things from a distance, right? The canonical bird's eye view, right? See it from a distance and visualize what they have. And the product has inside it this wonderful 3D map that we've worked really hard to make great and make scale and so on. So the concept was be able to see it from far away, but also ravens are really smart creatures who are good at finding little things. So the concept was that it would go and it would actually find the sensitive data inside the environment that needs to be protected. Now, there's a whole geekier angle to this. If you're thinking they were probably drinking while they were naming it, you'd be absolutely right. And it started to say like, well, what are the aesthetics do we want, for the brand, for the company? And we decided on this very Scandinavian aesthetic. And I love mythology. And so we're like, yeah, and actually like Odin has these two ravens, Hunin and Munin, who are memory and thought. And what do? They go out every day and they survey, all the different levels of, the Norse mythology. They can see every level and bring back the news to Odin. So like the customer would be like Odin and the products.
Wow.
Yeah. That was a couple really strong
that's like
many
many cocktails in. Yes.
Yeah. So, but if you go into the code base, you'd find names like, Odin and Midgard and, and the rest.
I love that.
So, yeah.
I love that. And so what's the business model and who are you selling into?
So we sell to cloud security architects, security engineering teams, and to a certain degree, cloud engineering teams. And what are we doing for them? Lots of times we're just helping them contain sprawl. We're not the security company who will try to keep the boogeyman out of your environment. Oh, we'll tell you when the Russians or the Chinese or the NSA is in there. Like, we are the company that helps you stay on top of your data and keeps it from leaking, being breached, getting stale, creating risk, creating too much, driving too much budget, gobbling up too much budget because the data shouldn't be there. And we help folks to put real guardrails around their data so it stays in check. So at the end of the day, we're selling to people who have that problem, not the privacy folks. Like I'm too old. I can't get up in the morning and build a I check the box for an attorney. Attorneys are lovely people. My wife's one, but I, no interest in selling them and selling to them. And then on the flip, data teams are another animal as well. They have their tooling. So, we want to build a beautiful, extensible, scalable platform for our customers. Usually it's under the chief information security officer, whoever owns security. in order to, get really fast questions to where their data is and help them automate keeping it under control. It's a direct sales model. So we're trying to build a category. We're building a product that's much needed, but doesn't have an existing budget. Doing that during a pandemic and an insurrection and a recession has been an extreme sport. Like, it's been a hell of an adventure. But having said that, the one area where we're not trying to innovate at all is like a super funky sales model or anything else. It is, enterprise, direct, or channel sales, straight, no chaser, nothing strange.
Yeah. And what's your differentiator as far as you said, like, hey, we were kind of on a jog and all of a sudden we're in the New York Marathon. Like, are these people on your tail and what are they doing as far as competing? How are you setting yourselves apart?
Yeah, it's a dogfight. I mean, any good market, like if you find yourself in a category by yourself, you're not in a category at all. So the funny thing is, if you're successful, you end up with a ton of competition. And if you don't like to compete, why the hell did you become an entrepreneur to begin with, right? It's like, so for us, when it came out, it was like tremendous validation. It was really fast. And as was the style in 2020 and 2021, it was hyper capitalized. So you look at it and you're like, I think you may have grabbed a lot of money. I hope you can live into that valuation, friend.
Yes.
But one of the things that we saw was, as in accordance with the times, valuations very high. The amount of capital that was raised was a lot. And, to the point to where you start to question, it's like, are you going to be able to grow into that? Like, I hope you know how to hold on to that capital. You're going to need it, and your future self is not going to be happy with you if you don't.
Yeah. And how about you guys? How did you fund the business and how much have you raised so far? Are you in a Series B?
Yeah, it's funny. So we've raised the same amount of money as a Series A in our space, but we've raised it over 3 rounds. So we did our first round in the heady pre-pandemic days of 2019 with Upfront, who is one of the bigger VCs here in LA. We raised our subsequent round with Kleiner Perkins when we were the first virtual deal ever done. When partner meetings were all in person. If you go out on, I think it's Business Insider, you'll hear Mamoon out there, who's a senior partner, talking about like a deal they did over Zoom. That was their very first one because it was the day the markets crashed and they didn't want anybody traveling and everyone was concerned. So we did it. And that was our Series A with Kleiner Perkins.
Like having never met in person?
Yeah, what's funny is we had met. The only way it worked is we had already met in person a bunch of times. And I highly recommend it, whether it's sales or investors. Like, you need that in-person trust and having done it. So in many ways, we'd put in the work before that meeting with them. And that was why it worked. It wasn't like we had some magical deck, pitch deck that wooed them, at times of great stress and, pulled the money out of their pockets, or I've got, some honeyed tongue and was able to persuade them having never met. Like, that's a bunch of crap. We'd put in the time with them to build the trust so that when it went to a point where it was Zoom, we were already known quantities with there. So yeah, it just doesn't work that way,
So you've raised 3 rounds, and are you comfortable saying how much you've raised so far and where you are with all this?
Yeah. I mean, it's all out there. So our last round was with Pelion out of Salt Lake City, Pelion Ventures, venture partners, and with In-Q-Tel, the investment branch of the intelligence community, U.S. intelligence community. We raised right around 40 million in total. So,
wow, that's a lot. That's a lot.
It doesn't feel like much.
Well, I know, because you're like, hey, because it's been a little bit, but it definitely is a lot. And I know that it probably doesn't feel like a lot. It feels like you're in like a very hot area though. I mean, obviously, like the cool area. We're getting a lot of business right now, obviously in AI, but data security is just huge.
Yeah, it's funny, but people understand what we're doing now since ChatGPT became a thing and people started to wrap their heads around generative AI. It made the elevator pitch so much easier. Just look at people and say, hey, what's behind ChatGPT and all these things? Large language models. What do they operate on? Massive troves of really important data. What we do is we protect that and make sure that it stays safe. And all of a sudden they're like, got it. Get it. I totally get the value of the data. Because before that, I don't think people really grokked the value of data or data science as well. But all of a sudden, like, it was funny. Like, I showed my parents when they were out over Christmas, I introduced them to ChatGPT and we had some fun with it. And I did the same thing with my son. And, it's just like they get it now. They're like, oh, they're like, that was on the news the other day when I caught up with them this weekend. That ChatGPT, we get it. If you can understand generative AI and where AI is going, you can also understand the value of data. If you can understand the value of data, you know intrinsically why you need to protect it. Proprietary data sets like need to be well defended because they're the lifeblood of the future business.
Yes, definitely. So tell me, you started to talk about, I know you guys are dispersed, you're remote first, and you've got people in Ukraine and kind of people everywhere. How has that been for you as a leader, trying to kind of create a culture, create synergy, also kind of dealing with the whole lack of ability to have kind of like innovate sitting on a whiteboard? How do you, like, what tools are you using?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been doing remote really since CrowdStrike. So back in 2013. So I've got a playbook that's about 10 years old and a bunch of things I've borrowed from other people and things that work, things that don't work, and so on. So there's a fallacy, and I think it really came up during the pandemic, that remote work means you don't get together. I think it's patently false. Like, that was crisis work at that time. That wasn't remote work. Like, remote work isn't having your entire family like jammed into a house where you're trying to get like a 7 or 8-year-old, on Zoom. Like, that isn't remote work.
Right.
Real remote work does entail getting together in person occasionally and getting in front of a whiteboard, because I don't think there's a substitute for it. And if you don't get together in person on occasion, you pay a trust tax. Like, people will not trust each other enough in order to go fast. You will slow down because you have a burden of the team just not functioning the way that it should. So we've tried to get the team together en masse at least once or twice a year and encourage our teams to get together regularly. And we use WeWork in order to allow people to get together as they need to and form bands and get together in whatever location makes sense, whether it's New York or whether it's SoCal or whether it's the Bay Area. WeWork supports that really, really well. So we do get together. We don't get together all the time, but we do get together as we need to pay down the trust tax, or we need to design something, or we need to get ready for a launch. If we don't plan a launch together in person, a big marketing one, it takes 2 times the time that it needs if we just get in the room for a day, and it's far less creative. So I'm not sure there is a substitute to getting in person, but I'm also equally certain you don't need that all the time. You just don't.
And how about onboarding new employees? Like, say tomorrow you hire an engineer. Is there something that you're like, hey, this is best practice that I've picked up along the way to get that person onboarded, integrated, to just understand how we think, how we do business, expectations, all of it, how to be successful?
Yeah. So anytime someone comes on, one of my employees, and I encourage everyone on the team to do this, I create a first 90 days document that walks them through everything and make sure that I check in with them on a regular basis. Not even every week, but like every couple days, we're working together on things. Ideally, people get together in their first 90 days. Like, let's get you somewhere. Like, let's find an excuse, not arbitrary, but like something you're working on that requires high fidelity communication. Like, let's get together and let's work through that and make that faster and make that better for you. Assigning a partner and making sure that they have an assigned buddy that they're working with, who can make sure that they're connected to the organization and so on. We do little things like there's an application called Donut on Slack, where you do like virtual coffee with people. That's important. Every Monday morning, we did this today, we have brunch together. And we all sit down at 9 a.m. and we have a cycle where each team, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's product or G&A and customer success, like they have every 4 weeks, you're up and you talk through and you give updates and you bring people from the team to give updates. We also have this thing called water cooler on Thursdays at 9:15 Pacific. we sit down and sometimes we just play games together. We have Irene, who's amazing on our team, where we play super cool games like GeoGuessr, and we break off into breakout rooms. Other times, someone will give a presentation, a show and tell, something about their personal life. Sometimes, like this week, it'll be walking through a report for a new customer and all talking through that together and what we see, what was hard about that, what was easy, where we can improve, and so on. But remote culture, you have to be very intentional about it. You have to season it with in person, and it's not easy. It's really not easy. And I think what we've seen is that satisfaction levels with remote work go up the further in your career you are, and the more complex your life is, and the more flexibility you demand. And it goes down as you have younger people. And I think that's one of the things that everybody's struggling with now is how do you onboard young talent into a remote organization? It's incredibly difficult. And I'm not sure anybody's cracked the code yet. What we did at CrowdStrike was we set up distributed centers. As we got bigger and grew, we basically had areas where we concentrated people, where there were senior leaders there, and we started putting younger people into those areas. Because otherwise, like, your failure rate is very, very high bringing on young talent into remote orgs.
Well, 100% for so many reasons. I mean, beyond too many reasons to list, from like there's nowhere really for them to work at home. They might have roommates, to like they need a little bit more structure, and they need mentorship, and just the like osmosis of what they're learning just sitting shoulder to shoulder with people. In my office, I mean, if I'm in the office working, sometimes I'm like, wow, if I hadn't been sitting here and listening and realizing like what they're saying on the phone just could be so much better, just polished up a little bit, but just sitting next to me and realizing that could have happened at home and it would have just not come off right, makes me want everybody in the office. But then you realize it's a recruiting challenge these days, and companies who are making 100% demands for people to come back completely 100% in person are having trouble, because they're having trouble with diversity and inclusion. They're having trouble with just nobody really wants to be back 100%. So
Yeah.
All of these tips that you're giving are super. I'm actually taking notes. They're super helpful. I love all of them. They're great. What about your recruiting strategy as far as drawing in talent, like getting on their radar, because we're all competing against, the big ones. And then once you get them on your radar, what's your recruiting process?
Yeah, I'd say, Shauna, we haven't been hiring for a little bit now. Like, a lot of folks are in this period, we've largely like just kind of held on to what we have for a period of time, which has been great for productivity, because to do hiring right, as it's a lot of time and energy. So we've enjoyed this period of kind of increased productivity because managers are focused on execution. I'd say, we use a combination of things. I want to give some credit to Kleiner Perkins. Their talent team is amazing. And they always, every week they distribute out a list of folks. And we found some great talent from Kleiner in particular. So I think VC talent teams, especially good VCs, can be very, very powerful. I've been in the same industry since 96. Like, network's pretty good. So we're able to cheat a fair bit. And I'm not the only one who's kind of deep in the field. I'll say recruiters, honestly, for targeted areas when we're trying to find something, especially when the talent market was so hot, we had to use recruiters as well, particularly for back-end engineering positions, and to a certain degree for front end. Other things I'd say is your website has to be good. I mean, it's the year of our Lord 2023. Like, don't have a crap website. Like, your website needs to explain who you are and what you do. Recruits are going to go there. I'll say recently I did hire for biz ops and finance, and I went into Greenhouse at the time, and I had like 30 candidates who applied. Like, 2 of them were amazing, and I ended up hiring one of them. So I'd say, like, great website, and also LinkedIn, having your LinkedIn game tight, super important. And also having your social game there, so you're posting to it, so people are getting a feel of your organization on LinkedIn without even having to go to your site. Like, all those are things that have worked reasonably well.
Yeah. I do think, some companies don't have that part dialed, and I love hearing that you're intentional about it. I think it's one of the most important roles of the CEO and founder to be thinking about talent. Um, and, they talk about, I guess it would be like employment branding versus just like the product branding, but like branding what a day in the life is like. And actually, like even the podcast can be like a way of getting out, like, hey, what's our CEO like? And
Yeah.
just giving exposure to a typical employee and just access to kind of how you think and what the culture is like. I think is so important because people are making decisions to join companies, not just for the product, but also just like, hey, what's a day in the life going to be like for me? More than ever. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 30 years. Like more than ever, that seems to be the driver for candidates these days. And then just obviously thinking about process and just not making it too laborious, but also, vetting really heavily because at a company that's not huge, it's every single hire matters so much. So it is this like fun, it's like this art and science to it. So yeah, I love that you're thinking about it. It's great. What are the long-term goals for the business as far as like you're crushing it right now, but I'm sure you've got, being the competitor that you are, some big goals, and where are you relative to those goals? Because you're still early in the game.
Yeah, I mean, we're right now it's a game of just stacking up, trying to bring on as many customers as we can and making them as successful as we can. That's really where we are right now. We're super happy with where the product's at. We're expanding coverage into new clouds, new data sources. We love our position. We're probably the only open core platform in the area. We're the most transparent. We believe we've got the most maturity, the most depth to the platform. And, we're delighted to showcase that for people. So a lot of it right now is just taking what we've built over the first 3 years of the company and applying it to new customers, and finding ways to reach them efficiently now, which is what every investor is looking for. Before it was grow, grow, grow. We don't care how you spend. Now it's like, how capital efficient are you? Which is probably how it should have always been.
Yes.
And, so really that's where we are. I mean, goals for the company is, we came here to create a category, and a category that we intended to lead. So the category is forming. Like the challenge now is to become the company that not only defines it, but wins it and leads it. And that starts by putting on, even in the midst of a recession be damned, whether it is or not, who cares, during this malaise, figuring out a way in order to show impressive growth so that even in a challenging funding environment, we can raise another round that we and, the current investors are proud of, and keep going in order to grow and kind of grab that, that pole position in an emerging category. That's been the goal from day one, and it's the goal now. It hasn't changed one iota.
Yeah. And so my last couple of questions, because I know that you talked about like the winning part is, maybe getting up a little earlier, staying a little later, like just really doing what you can to have an edge. I'm curious, and this is like a selfish question on my part, but if you have any hacks, like what do you do to set yourself up personally and professionally for a good week, a good day? And then also, what do you do to kind of unplug, unwind, give yourself some mental space?
Yeah. Yeah. So weekends are essential, both for getting some space and letting the subconscious mind kind of do some problem solving and thinking about things in a different way. I tend to do a lot of my reading over the weekend. And on Saturday is give yourself a little space. Sunday is more of a plan for the week ahead. So I put out my weekly goals in the Trello board. I make sure I'm in good shape for all my big stuff for the week, and that if it's a big thing, I have time set aside for it on the calendar to make sure I can get to it. But yeah, it's very clearly laid out. If I don't have that done, I can't even get into the week and feel okay. I've got to have it all nailed down. I have to know what I'm going to cover in my staff meeting first thing Monday morning. I have to know what I'm going to cover, at our brunch together meeting and so forth. All that has to be laid down in a checklist in my Trello board before I feel good. I'll usually have a project or two for the weekend as well, like usually a writing project, either for the podcast, a reading and a writing project. and I got to get those done too. The week is very regimented. I'm up at 4:15 almost every day. I get up, everything's set out beforehand. I drink my pre-workout. I go through the day. I clear out my email. I say good morning to the team, and then I go do my workout from like 5 to 6:30, usually with my trainer. Why do I use a trainer? Well, because I've injured myself too many times. History has told me that I suck at training myself. 5 knee surgeries, 2 shoulder surgeries. I fired myself in my early 40s. So I have an amazing trainer who also lets my brain wander. So she takes care of the tough stuff with my regimen and what I do. And I get to let my brain ponder all those things I primed it with around like 4:30 to 5, I was getting ready. And I drive in silence or listening to my buddy Claude Debussy in the morning just to let my brain lock in on the day.
Wow. So 5 to 6:30, incredible. Okay, so you've already done so much before people are even up.
Yep. And then breakfast with my son. There might be a phone call in between if there's something I really thought about and there's somebody on the East Coast that I'm not afraid of waking up. Our poor SC usually gets a call from me around like 6:30, so he's learned to expect that.
And what time are you going to bed?
I'm not Superman. I go to bed between 9 and 9:20, 9:30. So my hack is I go to bed very early. And I really stop making decisions around 3:00. I cut off my kind of decision making around 3 because I'm a huge Daniel Kahneman fan, Thinking Fast and Slow. He's the father of behavioral economics. It's a dense book, but it's an amazing book. And what you learn from that is you have precious few frontal lobe cycles throughout the day. You have about 2 to 3 hours worth, and you're basically done with those at some point. And since I start early, all of my good, high quality frontal lobe cycles are done by like 2, 3 o'clock. So I try not to take any important meetings after 3:00, and I start to do administrative work and kind of one-on-ones and just catching up with people. Then I slip into family mode around like 5:30, 6:30 if it on a very late day. And then I'm starting to wind down, usually by reading fantasy fiction. I'm a big geek. Like I love my sci-fi and fantasy, and that shuts my brain off enough to where I can crash. I can tell I'm ready for bed and I'm ready to sleep. I put my iPad down when I've reread the same page twice. That's my heuristic. So
my final question for you is, what fuels you?
I go back to what I said before. I love watching people, businesses, things grow. To me, it's a joyous process. And to be a part of that, like that's really what drives me. And it could be as little as like the avocado tree in the backyard of my trainer's tent. Like I can see it and I can see the little avocados growing every day. Or it's, watching someone accomplish something they didn't think they could do, doing a promotion for someone, landing a big deal, having a customer give you a high five. Like all those things are just, to me, that's the adventure, and it's pure joy.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.